So, hi everyone, my name is Emmanuel. I am an exchange student from Mexico. So I find very interesting how technology keep pushing the world forward in many different ways, especially when progress not only means that we need to build things bigger or more complex, but about making them work better or more efficient. So, and also it excites me seeing how one way of thinking can influence multiple fields, from being a pioneering work on hardware and artificial intelligence to founding multiple startups and also influencing a culture. Our guest today is Dr. Kurt. He studied mathematics here at Berkeley and got his PhD from Indiana University on computer science. And also, early in his career, he worked at Bell Labs, later became a technical leader at Synopsys, where his work helped define how modern computer chips are designed. And especially he founded multiple startups like DeepScale, like a startup that we talked last lecture about. It was about efficient artificial intelligence that was acquired by Tesla to improve their perception system for autonomous driving. And he also co-founded NexusFlow, a startup focused on artificial intelligence agents for cybersecurity, which was acquired by NVIDIA. That's pretty cool too. So, and nowadays, Dr. Kurt is a professor of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science here at Berkeley, and also conducting research at the Berkeley AI Research Lab. And also, Dr. Kurt also used computing as a way to preserve ancient Tibetan texts, showing how the same tools can use to be help to culture and history, not just the industry. So let's please give a warm welcome to Dr. Kurt.
So thanks so much. It's an extraordinary honor to be able to speak in this series. Richard Newton was a dear friend of mine. I was there at the night before he passed in the hospital, and we were friends, and he's very much responsible for me being here, so it's a really great honor. So I'm going to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's a lot more about entrepreneurship than innovation, but I'll try and slip that in. So I'm going to start by talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is me. Yeah, okay, chuckles. All right. But it's to a purpose. I think learning about entrepreneurship is kind of an apprenticeship, and rather than business cases, seeing real life examples, I think helps. Then I'm going to talk about you and entrepreneurship. I got the scoop from Forrest that you're very interested naturally in kind of what's hot and what's not right now. I'm going to talk about what's hot, and then I'll talk about what I think is not hot if you want. And then I have my own list of frequently asked questions if you don't have questions of your own. It really wouldn't be appropriate for me to go on and on about myself and whatever modest accomplishments I have if I wasn't, and I really mean this, if I wasn't entirely confident that every person here today can have a much more successful career than I had. And I mean that, and I don't mean that in some sort of glossy kind of feel-good way. But I mean, frankly, you got a lot of advantages that I didn't have. I was introduced as having my degree in mathematics from here. Actually, it's from Maharishi International University, a place you probably never heard of. And that's okay, because when I was in high school, I never heard of Berkeley either. So, but you were admitted to Berkeley, which means, honestly, you're a lot smarter than I am, and that's the truth. You're at Berkeley, which is a hub of entrepreneurship. You've had a 10-year head start. As you'll see, I didn't really start even getting into entrepreneurship until my 30s. And the environment today fosters entrepreneurship so much more than it did in the 80s. In the 80s, it was a really pretty fringy thing to do. And now it's, as you know, it's very much the norm. So I'm going to talk about my career from the beginning. So I had a basic career plan to get a PhD in computer science. My dream, and I got to intern there one summer during my PhD to join Bell Labs for life. And that may sound absurd today, but back in those days, you could dream of joining at 28 and kind of, yeah, maybe I'll retire at 68 after a 40-year career and so forth, build up a research reputation, and enjoy kind of a career right up what I'll call the promotion escalator. And for all this to make sense, Bell Labs' glory has certainly fallen in the years. It's not even called Bell Labs anymore. It's Nokia Bell Labs. But back in the day, it was just for me, a dream come true. It was the home of the transistor, which won a Nobel Prize, where the Big Bang Theory was confirmed. That won a Nobel Prize. My computer science heroes and the computer science environment in Unix that I was working with every day was developed there with Thompson and Ritchie. Algorithms I used were by Bob Tarjan, and many of the textbooks I used in grad school were by Aho and Ullman. And I got to know several of these individuals while I was there, and I guess just to single out one of them, Al Aho was something of a personal mentor to me. So I was really very much in kind of my dream career. And so I kind of think of it, I'm going to use this extended analogy of like these big corporations as being like a nice, big, comfortable ocean liner, luxury ocean liner, and then that's my little cabin in the ocean liner. That was kind of like my office at Bell Labs, and it was very comfortable. And then I kind of dreamed of just kind of going up this promotion escalator from a member of technical staff to maybe distinguished member, maybe I'd make department head or even director and so forth. And I did have a good career there. I was there for 7 years. Over those years, I became something of an authority on this emerging area of logic synthesis. That's, for those of you who don't know, that's the process of translating from a high-level description through logic descriptions of circuits into an actual physical realization that you can actually go and fab. And I developed one particular algorithm in there, which was called the Dagon algorithm, which was a key algorithm in that flow. And at Bell Labs, dozens of ICs were developed there. And I think I can honestly say that for probably something like 30 years or so, almost every digital portion of a circuit went at some point in the process through my algorithm. And it came many years later, but I did get a recognition of that when my paper on Dagon was cited as the most influential paper of the 1980s by the Design Automation Conference. So I wrote one book, lots of papers, many awards, and developed my technical reputation. But for all that, I should also mention, I made some really amazing friends. This is a group of us that used to go just a little bit north towards the city to go to the New Amsterdam Brewing Company. Wolfgang Fichtner was there, Mark Pinto, George Smith, Bill Corin you may have heard of, and so forth. I'll tell you a little bit more about these later. But really, so many extraordinary people there at Bell Labs, and many of them became my friends. But as I was transitioning to more and more, I began to feel that the world was just passing me by. 1 week after I joined Bell Laboratories, they announced a 20% reduction in force, which kind of meant that this will have zero or negative growth in the years to come. If you're in an organization where there's zero or negative growth, you only get promoted when somebody dies, right? And I looked around and go, I don't think anybody's dying around here. So this whole notion of going up the escalator, that went away. Literally weeks before I joined, actually showed up in the lab, one of the department heads left to found a startup called Silicon Design Labs. And then I think I just wish I could convey how this felt. One Sunday night, I hadn't had time in grad school to really pick up books on entrepreneurship or to even think about it much, but I got this book called The Spirit of Enterprise by George Gilder, and I'm sitting there reading it one Sunday night when I read this sentence: technology innovation has moved from Bell Laboratories and T.J. Watson Research to Silicon Valley startups. I mean, you talk about reading one sentence that kind of just really sets you back. I really began to think, wow, fairly early, am I in the right place? And then in 1987, Harvey Jones and a group of Sand Hill venture capitalists actually came to New Jersey to talk to me personally about a startup in logic synthesis. It just so happened that a scout had been, venture capitalists have scouts, and it just so happened that a scout had been at Bell Labs when I was giving my talk on Dagon, and he reported back, and then next thing you know, there were these partners and so forth. And so there, it wasn't an abstraction. It's, after Harvey Jones visited me, he went on to become the CEO of a particular startup in Silicon Valley that was integrating my technology as well as other technology right here from UC Berkeley to use logic synthesis to change the way circuits were designed. And so it wasn't just this kind of nagging, I don't know, maybe I should look around. I had a very tangible alternative. But honestly, I was just so comfortable at Bell Labs. In many ways, it was still my dream. And I was, frankly, a bit afraid. And one of the things that I'm going to try to get you to contemplate, or tonight and going forward, is your unconscious motivators. And it's so interesting when I think back. One of the reasons that really kept me there, it was the library. Now, it's probably very hard to understand today when you can just go to Google Scholar and download papers from the internet. But back in the 80s, you had to go to a library, go to a Xerox machine. First of all, they had to have what you were looking for, then borrow it, take it to the Xerox machine and copy it. And AT&T and Bell Labs had one of the best technical libraries in the world for computer science and so forth. And I used to spend every Friday afternoon there, and it was just heaven. And so, when I go back and think about, so what kept tugging me back, I would just think about, how could I ever walk away from this library? It was just unthinkable. And then one night I had a dream. And you'll think, you can't make this up. You'd think I'm making it up, but who would make up something like this? I was at my girlfriend's parents over Christmas. They lived up in Massachusetts. And I had this dream of Dave Gregory, who I knew. He was one of the co-founders of Synopsys. And in this dream, he was standing there, and thank you, Nano Banana, for this. This is exactly how the dream went. He was wearing this big gold dollar sign. He was surrounded by gold coins. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he said, "But Kurt, the really important thing is that we're all having so much fun." When I woke up that next morning, I made a phone call to my contact there at Synopsys and said, "Okay, I'm actually resolving to join Synopsys." So I don't know if I teed it up well, but I think it gets to this thing that I think we're so much driven by unconscious motivators. I'm not even sure that I was aware at the time of how much money was a motivator or how much having a dream about somebody being fantastically wealthy would motivate me, but it certainly did. So, in fact, just weeks later, I did join Synopsys as an individual contributor. And let me bring forward some of the lessons that I learned in the transition. So there are obvious problems with Career Plan A. So obviously for you, I doubt if any of you have really thought seriously about joining a company and having lifetime employment. And these, what I'm going to call these corporate cruise ships, they look secure, but they're not agile. In fact, they're actually very, very fragile. And when you're on there, I think it's a real, in a big corporation, I think it's kind of an illusion, or it can become an illusion, that whoever is running things up there in management is a far better navigator of these business waters than you're going to be. But I think the biggest problem with this big corporate cruise ship that I'm going to keep alluding to is you learn in that comfortable little cabin that I had there at Bell Laboratories, you learn absolutely nothing about the big open seas of business. You just sit there, you do your job, and the other business functions are kind of a mystery. In fact, kind of the culture at Bell Labs was worse than that. I mean, everybody knew that, engineers and researchers were tops. We used terms like marketing pukes. If we ever met someone in finance, we talk about them as office drones. Sales was full of sleazeballs. And anybody who was out in the customer in the field was just a wannabe researcher. And customers were kind of an abstraction, but when we thought about them, we thought they were kind of these poor unfortunates. In fact, we used to say that one of our jobs in Bell Labs research was to make sure that we didn't have to give money back to the ratepayers who were funding the telephone system. So that's the truth. That was the culture that I was in. So you can imagine in that culture how little you actually learn about business. And one thing I can tell you is that if hopefully you're wiser than me at your age, but if you're thinking like this is a great way to be an individual contributor at the bottom of the management ladder for the rest of your career. So, and remember these people that I mentioned before, well, in a nutshell, If you look at their careers subsequently to Bell Labs after they left, they were all fantastically more successful after they left Bell Laboratories than they were at the time. In particular, let me single out Bill Corin, who I'm still in contact with. He went on to be the Senior Vice President of Research and Infrastructure at Google, a place you've probably heard of. And he's now a venture capitalist at Sequoia Venture Capital, which is, without a doubt, one of the top 5 venture firms. Mark Pinto went on to be Executive Vice President at Applied Materials and now has been successive CEO of 2 startup companies. And I could go in detail and some of the other individuals as well. But I really learned it's not enough to be doing the right thing. It's not enough to be doing the right thing at the right people. It's not enough to be doing the right thing with the right people at the right time. I was doing all of those logic synthesis at Bell Laboratories in the 80s. You have to be doing it at the right company as well. And then if I look organizationally, well, actually, I should back up since I promised Victoria I would say something about innovation. And I know this is not going to be very inspirational, but this really taught me that innovation is not entrepreneurship. These are only mildly correlated. Bell Laboratories was a volcano of innovation. It was a patent volcano, but there was no entrepreneurial environment while I was there, and the in-market success of their products was, at least for the time I was there and immediately following, was very limited. If I look at these same individuals, the management lesson, I think, is if you want to change how people behave, you have to change how they're rewarded. Now, all of us were doing what we were doing because we were well rewarded at Bell Labs for what we were doing, but you notice it didn't have any impact on AT&T's customers at all. So if you find yourself managing an organization, and you're trying to get behavior from your people, you can't just stand up at a podium like this and keep talking about how important entrepreneurship is or serving the customer and so forth if you're not rewarding people for precisely those same things. One other lesson that I learned there was Ron Graham and the woman who became his wife in time were there at Bell Laboratories while I was there, and I don't know, I think there's some mathematicians in the audience. I'm sure you've heard of Paul Erdős and your Erdős number. And they once asked Ron Graham, what's your secret to this tremendous productivity? And he said, well, there are 168 hours in a week. So that's a very sobering thing. And I would say this is the toughest single lesson that I have to convey to you today, is that I wish I could say there was another way around it, but as far as I can tell, if you want extraordinary results, you need to put in extraordinary effort. Okay, back to that big shift from that big, comfortable ocean liner of Bell Laboratories to the startup. And above there, I show kind of a merchant vessel. It's about the right size, I think, for a startup. And the crew or the startup members. And I am also trying to be honest about, I didn't go from, this comfy cabin in this ocean liner to some hammock in the galley with the galley slaves or something like that. Because of my reputation, I was able to actually walk into frankly, a pretty cushy position at Synopsys when I joined. So I spent 7 years at Synopsys. So Synopsys went on to be a leader in the electronic design automation industry. They IPO'd just a year later. And I simultaneously with them kind of grew up to be a technical leader in EDA. And I think, I got something like 6 or 7 promotions in 7 years there. Our company grew from 100 people to 3,000. Our bookings went from 6 million to 1 billion. Our staff went from 100 to, as I said, 3,000. And the number of products that we had went from 1 to 25. And by the time I was, at the end of my career as CTO, I was overseeing, trying to make sure that all 25 of our products had leading edge technology. In terms of, broadly what I learned there, I was very fortunate at Synopsys, and I think if you join a successful startup, you can get an informal MBA. So you can always go to business school and study business cases, or if you're in a successful startup, you're seeing all these different functions. I learned so many aspects. I learned, from the finance standpoint, going public, lining up underwriters, how do you do the road show when you finally go public, how you grow a corporation through acquisitions. While I was at Synopsys, we were involved in 14 different acquisitions while I was there. Fundamental aspects of marketing like branding, marcom, how you define a value proposition, how do you do product positioning, go-to-market, customers' buying behavior, how you understand how they buy, business development, finance, how finance manages Wall Street and its expectations and so forth. So it really was a wonderful education. And in contrast to my prior view of all these different functions, and I'm not going to go through all these different individuals, but these are the individuals who stand out in my mind. I really saw how valuable marketing was. I saw how CEOs have the toughest. It's an unfathomably difficult job in a startup and doesn't get any easier when you go public. Sales is where your revenue comes from. As I'll mention later, I spent a lot of time going out on sales visits. Finance keeps your stock price up. Field engineering keeps your customer happy. And engineering is just one piece of the puzzle, and that was quite a contrast from this kind of narcissistic view that I had when I was at Bell Laboratories of, we're the center of the universe. And I learned more broadly that, teams win, not individuals. So at a startup, the whole startup is successful or not. Being a stellar individual in a failing startup is nothing to be proud of. And earlier I thought of at Bell Labs, I thought of customers kind of these unfortunate ratepayers. So one lesson I learned at Synopsys is the customer is king. But I also learned an important lesson that there are actually 3 very different types of customers. And pose to the question of the audience. So can you puzzle through for a startup what your 3 different customers, 3 different fundamentally different types of customers are? And the hint is there are 3 different ways you get money in the company. So you're all talking about the people who actually buy your products, and that's the one you naturally think of as customer. But the minute you try and do a startup, and some of you I expect probably have already started one, the minute you try and get venture capital, you better be thinking of your venture capital firm and your venture capital partner as your customer. It has all the same questions of product positioning, how you position your product. And then finally, the one I think, if you've been a month in a startup, probably that makes sense to you. But then I find lots of startups don't think about the exit, and you'll hear entrepreneurs say, don't think about the exit, only look at your vision and so forth. I'm a little more pragmatic than that. I think you should always be assessing potential for exit. And so you should be thinking about, well, if we go out by acquisition, who would buy us? And if we went public, why would people buy our stock? So all these require thought in about not just the product positioning of the individual product, but the vision of the company that you're creating. Okay, so I'm going to move on to what I think is the most important lesson I learned from Synopsys. And if you only remember one lesson from this talk, it's I'm going to draw from Alan Kay, who, I don't know, he was famous in my early era. I think he's a little bit past his prime too. But he says the right perspective is worth 80 IQ points. And the reason Synopsys illustrates this is that when we entered the synthesis market, we had what, in today's parlance, Geoffrey Moore's parlance, gorillas in the market. There was Daisy, Mentor, Valid, and Cadence, and these were well-established players that had a lot more money to spend on R&D. They had more customer mind share among the Suns and the Silicon Graphics and so forth of the world. They had a much bigger sales channel, but they did not prioritize building a new product capability in logic synthesis. And in contrast, Synopsys had 100% focus and commitment that logic synthesis would become the dominant technology for designing integrated circuits. And that I think was the key to its success. And again, the Alan Kay's thing is this perspective, it's not a vision. It's not something that you think may be true. It's you've learned and you've gotten yourself to a vantage point in which you just see that is true. So Harvey Jones, who was former CEO of Daisy and now Synopsys, he had already seen that traditional design methods were not going to scale as Moore's Law grew. Art DeJeus, the founder and VP of Engineering, had seen the promise of logic optimization at General Electric. UC Berkeley had seen a lot of the power of optimization here in research. And I had already seen many circuits at AT&T Bell Laboratories built with our software with 5-person groups competing against 50-person groups and producing a superior circuit. So with that vantage point, with that perspective, we saw the importance of commitment. We saw the potential for this market. And we moved forward with a speed that grabbed the largest product market in EDA history from all these established gorillas, right? So that perspective is the most important thing I have to. Okay, so with that then, moving along, applying another lesson learned again, change is good. So I was at the top of my service band in my lab at AT&T Bell Labs when I left for Synopsys. And I was at the top of my desired corporate ladder. I was CTO and Senior Vice President at Synopsys. I didn't want to be a general manager of a product line. I didn't want to be CEO. And frankly, I ran out of good ideas about how to move our company forward. I really began to feel that it was time for a change, time for some new challenges. And fortunately, I had this friend at Berkeley named Richard Newton. And from him, and really, building consensus among other faculty in EDA and then broadly the department, I got an opportunity to come here as a full professor of ECS. And I thought, well, when will that opportunity come again? Oh, never. Okay, I guess I better move. So I spent, I won't go through my full, what's verging on almost a 30-year career now. But for the last 20 years, I've been focused on making algorithms in this very rapidly evolving area of machine learning and AI more computationally efficient. I think I've graduated like 26 distinguished PhD graduates. You heard from Forresty and Dola last week. You may have heard of Brian Catanzaro. He's the VP of Applied Machine Learning Research at NVIDIA. He's also a student in many others, dotting the industry as well as other universities. And currently I'm focused on the computational challenges presented by large language models and complex agentic systems, which I'll talk about later. But maybe just to add one more thing rather than to go on and on, relevant here is that I've been something of a champion of entrepreneurship at Berkeley ever since I came here. It hasn't always been the friendliest environment. I've taught something like 7 classes on entrepreneurship in Haas, ECS. I'm very proud that I was able to teach this building a tech-centric startup with Lean Launchpad with the inventor of the Lean Launchpad approach, Steve Blank. And then when I joined here at Berkeley as a faculty member, again, getting back to the use of perspective, I came here, and I'm again focusing my career on the entrepreneurial kind of slant here. I came here with this perspective, industry perspective from being CTO and Senior Vice President at Synopsys. I knew a lot about our customers in semiconductor industry. I knew a lot about our competitors. And I could use that perspective, that extra 80 IQ points, to do a series of investments, and I just rattled off a number of them here, which, I don't want to say it was exactly shooting fish in a barrel, but I could just see that these startup companies had opportunities given the perspective that I had already had. And so there were a number of cases here where people just thought I was a genius for choosing companies that had been turned down by 27 different venture capitalists, and yet I said, this is what you want to invest in, and yet it wasn't genius. It wasn't some prophetic insight. It was just I had information that other people didn't, which informed those investments. But I do want to point out one thing about this transition in my career. So I came here out of the EDA industry, and I was, one of the leaders in the field, frankly, technically. I co-founded and co-PI'd the GigScale Silicon Research Center, which was one of the largest research centers on campus for some years. It brought $7.5 million to campus, which then went to Berkeley into another under $7.5 million a year, which went to Berkeley and a number of other campuses. But I felt that this whole area of EDA was reaching something of a plateau, both as an industry and as a research area. And I was looking at, what's the next big challenge? And I was observing that we were putting more and more processors on a single semiconductor die, and that on-chip parallelism was becoming a very powerful new phenomenon. So I don't know, I forget how Victoria phrased it, but this whole notion of challenge yourself. But it's tough to go from leader of a field to not being known in a field. But as I moved from EDA to working on parallelism, nobody had the slightest idea who I was. But that's what I did. And fortunately, I had some great students. And, it was frankly some years, but only some years before Brian Catanzaro had this brilliant idea of applying GPUs to accelerated machine learning algorithms. And it's probably not a surprise then that this gentleman also is now a vice president at NVIDIA. So that was kind of a big breakthrough in my research group as well as in my own direction. Then there was also another fellow that you met last week, Forrest Iandola. And so it's interesting to look back in the history. I think he jumped a little early when we co-founded DeepScale, and that's a whole story, because it wasn't until 2016 that he actually, this core technology of DeepScale started, which was SqueezeNet, was published. And then it was just 3 years after that they were acquired by Tesla. And hats off to Andrej Karpathy for driving that. And when I went through Forrest's slides, I don't think he touted this. I mean, I even tell my friends at Tesla that I show this slide, which is because it's anatomically correct. But if you look at the price of Tesla stock at the time of our acquisition, it was $45 a share. And then only like 2.5 years later, it was up to over $1,000. So I don't think we can take all the credit for that at DeepScale.
It's interesting if you go further to look at when you all left.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's back down again.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to take, but I've even told Andre that I show the slide. He says, yeah, enjoy it, right? There's a little, where there's smoke, there's some fire, right? Okay, so, and again, I don't know that Forrest really, Forrest and I discuss our different perspectives on our experience at DeepScale. I don't know that he explains it in just the right way. But one thing that we were both kind of students of Steve Blank and the Lean Launchpad approach. And we both believe very much that, and held ourselves accountable at DeepScale, you don't have a product, you don't have a potential product until when you show it to your customers and their eyes dilate and they start saying, when can I have it? How much is it going to cost me? How many users can you support now? That's what you're looking for, and we held ourselves accountable to that. And what they wanted, what they were excited about is these robo-taxis and advanced passenger cars had cameras, had LiDAR, had radar, some even had ultrasonic and so forth. And what they wanted was, rather than just all these diverse sensors with different inputs, we had sold them the notion that we could integrate all these into a single view of the environment. And I was on some of those visits with customers. Forrest was, of course, in all of them. When I saw, yes, when can we have it? That's exactly what we want, and so forth. The eyes dilation and so forth. But we learned a really tough lesson. We delivered on that about 9 months after the inception. And when they got it, they went, wow, now that we think about it, that's going to cause a lot more disruption on the post-processing of the vision and our motion planning and control. I don't know what we're going to do with this. So that was quite a shocker to a young startup. 9 months of focusing on a particular product direction with a lot of confidence and proof of some initial, checks from potential customers to pursue that, only to have them kind of waffle around and say, well, now that we got it, we're not sure we really wanted it anyway. So that really got me thinking about this whole process of Lean Launchpad and this, is eye dilation enough? And to come to realize, I stand here today and say, customer interest is not enough. I mean, nobody was asking Synopsys for logic synthesis. Nobody was walking around saying, gosh, when are you going to have logic synthesis done? But Synopsys turned logic synthesis into the most successful product in the history of the EDA industry. So, question in the audience, what did Synopsys have that DeepScale was lacking with regard to their customers? This gentleman in the front.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Complete shot in the dark, would it be that Synopsys consciously made the effort to turn logic synthesis into the most successful product, while DeepScale was just making a technology that people know?
No. I'll give you a hint. What's the one lesson that I want you to walk away with today? Oh, you better get that. We should have exit. People should not be able to get out of the room without repeating that. What's the number one lesson today?
Can we give you
Yes.
the top 5 potential?
I think we have a candidate here.
The right perspective is worth 80 IQ points.
Give that man a cigar. That's exactly it. That's it. What Synopsys had is it wasn't that Harvey Jones was a better salesman. He was a very good salesman, than Forrest. It wasn't that the innovation of logic synthesis was so much greater. Actually, what we did at DeepScale was very innovative. It was that we had the perspective from the experience that this would really work. We knew better than the customers. The customers said that they didn't need logic synthesis. We knew that they did need logic synthesis. We knew that with Moore's law, they would need it, and they would need it more every process generation. And we were right. So I point this out because I do think if you just keep asking yourself, do I have the superior perspective in this? It's a poker thing, like, are you the sucker at the table? Do I have the best vantage point on the situation, or does someone else, or how do I get a better vantage point? That's the most important thing. Okay, so moving closer to the present. So in the last few years, I've done agentic process automation for the enterprise with NARDA. Wearing my team colors today. Be happy in breaks or whatever to talk more about these. I'm just going to kind of rush through these. As was mentioned earlier, NexusFlow. NexusFlow got off to a very good start with angel investments from Jeff Dean and Schulman and a seed round from Point72 Infusion Fund, and was very quickly snapped up by NVIDIA. You may or may not be aware that there's this huge talent grab going on in this area as the hyperscalers try to get all the talent they can that's relevant to AI. And then this one is dear to my heart, SIG-IQ AI, which is really working to give every student a personal tutor, a personal co-pilot for their education. Okay, so that's all about me. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about you and entrepreneurship. And so the first, maybe the second most important lesson of today is entrepreneur is the only career option in the 21st century. There are no safety nets. There's no getting on the corporate ladder. There's no lifetime employment. Chances are Social Security will be bust by the time that you're finally ready to get it, right? I certainly would not rely on the government in any way. So what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Well, it's becoming so much the norm to get a startup. The lawyers are even willing to front you the money and defer the legal fees, pitch a VC, get some venture funding, that I think that's not even a high enough bar to call yourself an entrepreneur. To me, it's really about just facing these choppy seas of the business world without relying on the safety net of the Coast Guard or anything else. Just really saying, I'm going to face the business world on its own and be captain of my own ship. It's also about learning to attract and retain a tier to embark on the voyage with you. That's I think we'll see they're talking about the one-person billion-dollar company. We haven't seen that yet. I think even the smallest unicorns, have 5 or 6 people. And then finally, something I'll be reiterating is you just have to be willing to do whatever it takes to make your enterprise a success. So I think today is the day. It's as good a day as any to realize that you do need to become captain of your own, or at least shipmate on your own ship. You're facing a so much more rapidly changing, globally competitive environment in the 21st century. I didn't need to worry when I was at Bell Laboratories about people working 996 at Samsung or Huawei, right? Everyone in this room does. You know, they are people out there in the global environment are working harder than we are. If you're like me, it could be a difficult transition for you because you've got some safety nets. But the best thing about it is that even your worst failures will be learning experiences, whereas in the big corporate ocean liner, even your successes, you won't be learning from about the business world. Okay, so then it gets down to, well, what kind of entrepreneur will you be? Because I think there's lots of motivators. I do believe if you can dream it, you can do it. You see that kind of wacky sensibility from the most successful business decision of my life came from a dream from nowhere, right? But then it's getting, you know, what really is your dream? And I've come to believe over my career that, you know, whether it's someone whining in a coffee shop in Berkeley or whether it's someone standing at a podium like that, most people actually accomplish what they want in life, but they're not always clear about what their motives are, and they're driven by unconscious motives. And when they're driven by unconscious motives, then even when they get what they wanted, they may not enjoy it. So I'd like to talk about some of the most common motivators for being an entrepreneur: fame, fortune, power and influence, camaraderie, just being part of a great team, visionary impact, or doing good. And I don't want to just do this abstractly. So, you know, it's not super vulnerable to me, but I thought it'd be most useful for me to talk about myself. So to me, there's no doubt that the number one appeal of entrepreneurship for me is this notion of joining a team, kind of getting on the merchant vessel. We're all going to be in the boat together. We're going to be, you know, mutually responsible to each other. We've got a place that we're headed. We're going to really do this. And, you know, that has really been kind of repeated over and over in my career. There's this wonderful speech. I've heard Kenneth Branagh do it perhaps the best from Henry V. We happy few, we band of brothers, and gentlemen in England, now abed, shall think themselves accursed they were not here. What's the point? It's like people in years to come are going to go, God, you know, I had the opportunity to join that startup, and I don't know why I didn't. And look at them now. You know, that's the spirit. And I show a number of different people that I've had success with here, and there's a whole nother take on my career that it really is all about people, and I don't have time, and you probably don't have the patience to hear about all these. But when I do kind of a kind of retrospective on my career, there's a whole refactoring of it in which it's really just about introductions. You know, this person introduced me to that, this person helped facilitate that. Now, when I was younger, somebody could actually get you a job, right? In this competitive environment, people can just get you an interview, and then you're on your own. So that's as much as you can hope for, but these getting an interview or getting introduced to someone for the opportunity to make an investment, that itself can be really critical. Just like Forrest introduced him to Arvind Srinivas. I don't know if he mentioned that, and that will undoubtedly, at least as things appear, be the most successful investment of my life. Okay, and about people, it's really pretty simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's carried me a long way. I really think Art de Jus, you know, at Synopsys, he always held himself accountable to that, and it was a very inspiring example. I've tried to live up to that as well. And a real bonus is if you can be nice in the process, and that's a work in progress for me. You know, putting that little gentle, you know, feel-good thing on top of it, but I do try to treat people fairly. So fortune is another big motivator. I mean, you saw it in my dream. It was my dream, wasn't somebody else's dream, filled of gold. Next morning, I'm ready to go to the West Coast and talk to my girlfriend about when she can join me later. But, you know, it's financial independence and spending power. You know, the world that I live in revolves around money, and you need money to do almost anything. And so fortune is a very important entrepreneurial driver for me. And then visionary impact, that's good. And I'm so glad that I'm able to put them together in this company, SIG-IQ AI. This whole notion of giving a personal math tutor to every child. And when I saw our first deployment, I was so touched. They're not giving it to the elite high school in Dayton, Ohio. They're giving it to a school for under-resourced children that's being sponsored by a wealthy entrepreneur in Dayton, Ohio, and under the guidance of this principal, A.J. Stick, and really showing how this can help. And this, to me, is, I think, the only thing that I know. Education is the only thing that I can think can break intergenerational poverty. But for that to be, possible, these are the people who have the least resources to get that extra help in education. I think AI is the only thing that can do it, and that's very much A.J. Stick's, the principal's view as well. Okay, so as a wrapping up lessons learned, you can have it all. I didn't anticipate, but you'll see it up there in your upper left there. I'm so happy the time I get to spend with very educated lamas from the Tibetan tradition, translating Tibetan texts. I have a wonderful home in the Las Gatas Mountains, as well as one in El Cerrito here. That's me accepting the most influential paper, the 1980s award. Scuba diving in Hawaii, congratulating my grad students, off on a boat with my girlfriend, or spending time in Hawaii. Again, I would not dare kind of lord this over you if I didn't feel every single one of you can do all this and more. And you can do it, but you have to be willing to do it all to get there and fail sometimes. So what I'm showing up the front is I used to spend a lot of time in Japan with sales on behalf of Synopsys, and I had one rule: don't tell me what I'm eating until after I eat it, if you really want me to eat it. And so that worked out pretty well. And what it's kind of hard to tell in your lower right-hand corner there, but that's actually Richard Newton there. Richard Newton loved to embarrass me by saying, "Okay, well, we're going to put on a little scene from Shakespeare," or "Okay, we're going to do this play." And again, good friend of mine. And Richard, if that's what you want to do, that's what we're going to do. And so you just can't draw boundaries. Okay. So then last, as I say, Forrest tipped me what's hot and what's not. I'm just going to kind of rush through this a little bit. But basically, in a nutshell, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see every business-to-business process and every business-to-consumer process intermediated by AI-enabled agents. And we're seeing that already. And so I think the most relevant thing to you in terms of your careers are, I can only see in that world that I know 2 different job descriptions. One is very, very deeply technical AI experts, and the other is very, very domain conversant domain experts. I don't think kind of being pretty good at programming and having a pretty good LEET code score is going to cut it. And I would not put the domain expertise as less important than the AI. I live in an AI bubble, so I know a lot more AI experts than I know domain experts. And there's a lot more diverse kinds of AI expertise. So I see, time is going on. So let me kind of quickly go through a little bit to dimensionalize that. So this was the beginning, just a prompt of this new large language model era. Just a prompt put into ChatGPT 4, and you get out an interesting answer, and it would say 2021, and you'd ask it, well, what about today? And it'd say, my last data is 2021. Because it had a kind of a fixed program, and you put your user input, and you got an output. It's like the earliest days of CPU computing. And the skills required to build that are training, data aggregation, training methods, post-training. And then very quickly, companies like Perplexity and so forth said, well, we can take that capability, and if we just hook it up to the internet, we can get the most recent results. And then you could say, what is the top-rated university? And it would give you the latest results. And that's kind of like when single CPUs had access to maybe a database and the internet. And then you begin to need this user skills like model selection, prompting, partial fine-tuning, full supervised fine-tuning, reinforcement learning. Obviously, if you don't know these words already, then I don't have time to give you a tutorial on them, but this does say the kind of the menu of skill set that if you want to be an AI expert, as well as function calling and retrieval augmented generation. And we're just going to see this get more and more complex. This is kind of the fringe of anything that's realizable where agents can interact with each other. You can have multiple models, and the agents can, say, actuate a 3D printer to 3D print something. They can give a buy signal to buy a stock. Maybe they can actually actuate a robot arm. And that's not the end. We will see all of our complex software systems re-envisioned in terms of agents. We will see the ISO stack re-envisioned in terms of agents. And again, I think if you're asking me today here, the big decision for you is AI expert and go really deep there, or domain expert and go deep there. So in my lesson of lesson, just never stop learning. I'm sure over the years here, there have been so many more successful entrepreneurs here, sitting here than me. The one thing I can say is that I don't know anybody who's thought harder and kept trying to learn lessons from every entrepreneurial experience that I have. And I want to wish you all good luck in your entrepreneurial career.
Kurt, in, I don't know, my 15 years of doing this, I don't think anybody has been so authentic about calling the different learnings and sharing so much with us. And it's really an honor because of Rich Newton also.
Yeah, no, it's...
So it's really great that you're here. We are going to take questions, but I want to say that at 6:25, we're going to try to do a group picture. So I just want you to be aware of that also. So we'll go around with who has questions? And yeah, oh, look at you. After that, no, good for you.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask, you talked about the right perspective. Do you think it's something that should be sought after actively? And if so, is it something that's a result of immersing yourself in a domain that's that you believe you're an expert in, or how do you find that superior perspective?
Well, it's an interesting nuance in terms of you can get a right perspective on a lot of things. You could get a right perspective on how to grow a garden in your backyard in Berkeley, and you might get really good at that. Is that what you really want to do? So there is a kind of so I'll reemphasize. There's a personal motivator, and if your motivator is about making money, that will put you one direction generally. If your motivator is about societal impact, that will put you in another. If you have a group of friends who are going off to do a startup, that will take you, that you really love working with, that'll take you in another. And then after that, I would say depending on each of those, if it's about money, you sit down and think about what's the best way in the world to use these technologies, these emerging technologies to make money. And if it's about societal impact, it's like, where do we want to impact society, and how can we do that with AI? And how do I become an expert on that? So yes, absolutely, you don't, frankly, I could expand more, and I actually, there's an entire interview with me at a podcast from the Design Automation Conference talking about this, but I consciously chose logic synthesis, but a lot of other things after that I just got lucky and stumbled into to build my perspective. But so it's a combination of conscious effort to seek out how am I going to get the most informed view, and then as you explore an area, you network, you meet people, they show you things that you hadn't thought of exploring. Over here.
Thanks for coming. I really loved your point about innovation not being entrepreneurship, and I felt that went very nicely with your criticisms of Bell Lab as well. It reminded me recently of hearing someone talk about the difference between building tech and versus building tech-enabled innovation in X area. So in my example, fashion tech versus tech-enabled fashion, and that the latter has more pragmatic value.
Right.
I'm curious, because you've had the opportunity to both be a researcher and an entrepreneur outside of the research lab, how you think about innovation versus entrepreneurship, and if you could just elaborate more on that.
Sure. I mean, I guess if I were to add one slide to my deck today, it would be the best startups come from orchestrating proven technologies in a novel way, not by putting some big research breakthrough and innovation in the middle of your business plan. Does that make sense? So you really you don't want in a startup to have a big technical risk. That's my own personal. Obviously, there are many now instantly billion-dollar valued companies that are not choosing that route, but that's my opinion. In terms of my own, frankly, if I'm thinking about big questions, I'm thinking about life after death or something like that, or so I wouldn't exactly call myself a visionary, typically a visionary-driven entrepreneur. Most often, I'm kind of looking at what are some of the key problems that we're facing in the growth of technology. I'm thinking about, where's the money in that picture? Where's the, and money and impact often go together, maybe not 100% correlated. And then I'm going, okay, if they were all solved, the world would be different today. So they're not solved, so what can I do about it? I mean, it's really just that simple. And so there's finding the right problem, and then there's just, throwing yourself into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great.
Hi, thank you. So my questions, I really appreciate your talk about you have.
Can you just hold your hand up and just introduce yourself so Kurt can see? It's hard to see.
Here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
I really like you have all different perspective about the industry and academic and also the startup. I have my past experience working as a software engineer at Microsoft for 6 years, and most of them are the traditional Azure core governance team. Nothing about AI, so I treated this year as a learning phase to learn some agentic AI course and the knowledge representation of intelligence application. So I try to restructure the Azure core governance, the architect by using the agentic AI and the knowledge representation. But right now, it looks like I currently in a transition phase. Should I go back to a big giant company to start with a legal system design, or I need to jump to a startup or just co-founding something? I do have some prototype in agentic AI course and a knowledge representation course, but I don't know how it may be a toy project, but it may have potential. Exactly, I don't know. So right now, I just want to get your perspective. What's your next decision if you only have
Life after death, right after you tell children?
Yeah, no, I'm also careful about giving that kind of advice. One of my greatest things I'm proud of is that David Filo and Jerry Yang didn't ask me about, should we found Yahoo, this thing, because I would have told them, no, stay in school at Stanford, you'll do much better. So, didn't do that. So I really don't like to get kind of a little bit of a perspective and then kind of, oh, well, you should plan your life around what I'm about to say. So I have to say I'm underinformed to tell you, but I would say, if I had to be safe, I'd say go back to Microsoft with what you've learned here and really keep an eye out for how can I be doing something that Microsoft is not doing 10 times better, or something that Microsoft is doing that has customer interest, but I can see how I can do it 10 times better. I think that's probably as much as I can.
So is there any strategy to make?
We have a bunch of questions, and
Yeah.
it's so specific, so maybe you can talk later.
Yeah.
Who's next?
At one point in your talk, you said the customer's always right, and then you went on to talk about how sometimes you're right and the customer doesn't realize it. With retrospect, that's great and easy to sort of say which time was true, but how to people who don't have the retrospect yet, how do you think about knowing if the customer is right or if you might have an insight?
Well, actually, to be clear, I would say, there's a lot of Lean Launchpad that, that presumes the customer is right. And if you get that eye dilation, you're really on the right track. and I have come to revise that viewpoint, that the bar is you really need to understand end-to-end the customer problem in such detail as well as anybody working in that domain, which I think practically for startup advice means if you're a techie, you want a domain expert as a co-founder, just as a domain expert wants a techie as a co-founder. You want somebody who lives and breathes it and really understands, no. And you build a prototype that shows, look, we can demonstrate we can do much better. And even though the customer isn't asking for this yet, we can see this is going to, and this is another thing I learned in this auditorium, Dada Banatao saying, don't think about 2x. You got to be showing 5x, 10x improvements. But if you see a 5 or 10x improvement end to end, and your domain expert says this is the real problem, that to me is the go-ahead these days.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, so I personally have this situation where I feel like I'm like half technology and half business. Raise your hand for a second. Oh yeah, hey Alex.
Oh, there you are, okay.
And I was wondering if you feel like you're stuck between two disciplines. Like for me, it's like technology and business. And like, I don't know, if it be a job, it might be like a product manager, but for me personally, if you want to build a company, you kind of need to double down on one thing. And for me, like, you don't start a company, in my opinion, like as a product manager, or like, am I wrong? And then how do you know what you double down on?
Well, I mean, I tried to express that, oops. I mean, this is kind of what I would hold myself accountable in. You know, in your starting team, either you have somebody who understands the left-hand side of this, and for one of these areas on the right-hand side, and there are many, many others, you have someone who really deeply understands that, not has kind of a passing notion that there could be some opportunity there. Now, on the one hand, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we can train you in maybe 4 years over in the Berkeley AI Research Lab to be someone on the left-hand side. How you become an expert on the right-hand side, you know, is you know, there's probably not a couple courses at Berkeley and suddenly you're there. You know, you need some working experience typically to understand. But I would, you know, it's easier for me to talk about the absolute but you do want to see all the way through. We understand exactly how we can solve this problem orchestrating these technologies, and not just a general sense of like, I think there's an opportunity here.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Tara, and I was just. Oh, yeah.
Yep. Hi.
I'm a sophomore, and like when I originally came into Berkeley, I never really thought about like getting a PhD, but I feel like nowadays, like maybe to become like an AI expert, as you were saying, is it like, I guess I was just wondering, do you think it's necessary to get a PhD, and like who would you recommend? Like
Well, there's the list. And if you can get through that list of things you should know, if you can get through that list without getting a PhD, then probably not. I think many people find it easier to get a PhD than to master that list of skills. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, and believe me, sophomore is a good time to start thinking about if you want to get a PhD in AI. We just finished our admissions process, and you know, you want to show up with 1 or 2 first author publications in a top venue if you want to get into grad school in AI. And I certainly couldn't have done that when I was an undergraduate, but that's the global competition you're facing these days. So sophomore is a great time to get started.
Hi, Kurt.
Hi.
Right here.
Hey.
Really appreciate the insightful lessons that you've
Thank
given
you.
so far. I think on a similar vein of education, a lot of people are saying now to get into AI is actually, it's already too late. And they say that because there's already been PhDs who've been studying the field for so long, that it's almost everyone's trying to understand what is the next big, what's hot innovation that they can study and become experts in. As someone who's been a serial entrepreneur, as in yourself, do you attribute successful entrepreneurship from having a very deep and vast knowledge on a particular subject matter in something that might not be hot at the time? Or would you argue that there's a specific nuance to jumping ship when a field becomes hot and becomes pertinent in that space, and then switching and becoming a new, I guess, rather more of a domain expert rather than someone who has deep, vast knowledge as an AI or profound researcher?
Well, first let me address the first presumption. We are in a very, very primitive era of AI. And so this was the purpose of this slide, and I'm sorry I had to go through it so quickly. We're in a period of AI that I would say is analogous to like maybe early 70s, maybe even 60s of computer software. You know, a single program, that is the weights for a large language model get loaded, and then you got access to a few other things. You can do some function calling and databases and so forth like that, but you're still just running this one program, right? That's a very, very primitive state. That's a long way from, oops, I'm going the wrong, let's see, yeah. That's a long way from this, much less this. So I do not, don't let anybody tell you, oh yeah, it's too late for AI. No, it's just the right time for AI, right? I do think you also have to be honest with yourself, and that's something that, you know, I can't diagnose from up here. I'm glad I don't have to, in deep, understand everything on the left-hand side. I've got kind of a managerial understanding. I've got grad students who know all this stuff very well, but you got to assess, is that me or not, you know? And otherwise, you know, I do feel like there's just so many individual opportunities. If you had the domain expertise, you know, then you can really, there's an opportunity to be realized there by applying AI, you know, teaming up with somebody who's at least a very, very adept user of AI to solve that problem. Is that good to hear?
Definitely, that answers my question.
Thank you.
Hi, over here.
Yep.
Hi. Thank you so much for your time speaking today.
Thank you.
As someone studying business, I was very curious about the domain expert section of the slide.
Right.
And I was curious about your kind of advice on becoming a domain expert, especially in the advent of this kind of agentic era. And also considering how a lot of the kind of bullets on that side can be attributed to soft skills that eventually could be automated to some extent.
Well, the soft skills, excellent point. The whole point of the right-hand side is these are all skills that will be automated by AI, but to do that, you can't just get somebody like me and suddenly I'm doing that, right? I mean, I had a close friend who worked in HR. Her expertise was vacation processing. You know, she worked at PeopleSoft and then Workday. And that was like, you know, volumes of details of international rules if it's a voluntary day off, if it's according to some legal leave act, you're able to take care of your, you know, wherever you go. That's the kind of domain expertise that you need if you want to do something like automate a workday or something, and you need a bunch of those people. So there's that, and then there's the AI stuff. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely, the whole point is everything on the right-hand side of the slide will be automated by AI, but will require deep domain experts in order to do that.
That makes sense, thank you.
We have one more question, and then hopefully we'll take a big picture, and then people will come up and, you know,
Okay.
all over you.
All right, great.
So you made the big jump from Bell Labs to Synopsys, and in today's world that's changing just faster and faster, a lot of us, our current careers that we're looking to won't exist by the time we graduate. We're going to have to make jumps, we're going to have to make changes. What advice would you give us to consciously make decisions that don't feel short-sighted, to make decisions that are like to jump to a different field, for example, or to pivot our careers? What advice would you have in terms of making that leap and making it stick?
Yeah, well, let me use that to get back to something that Victoria asked me to do earlier, which is talk about early meetings with Arvind Srinivas. So I'm embarrassed to say that it took 2 years of Forrest saying you should meet this guy Arvind Srinivas before I met him. And when I met him...
Can you just, I'm not sure that everybody knows.
Oh, sorry, Arvind Srinivas, people know Perplexity? Anybody heard of it? Yeah, Okay, so yeah, so took a couple of years. I thought Arvind was going to go off and be a professor. You know, yeah, lots of people are interested in entrepreneurship. I don't know if he's got the fire in the back. So I finally met him. You know, he was doing this natural language to SQL query thing. He gave me the opportunity to invest, even talked about advising, you know, Forrest, and he will tells people routinely that Forrest is the person who got him into entrepreneurship, and Forrest is the person who introduced him to his first CEO, since he could not be a CEO because he was on an F1 visa. So, and you know, I kind of missed that because I just sampled that one particular thing. But then 4 months later, he had pivoted a number of times and he had 1 million users. And I was at a venture capital event and I just said, Arvind, please, can I, please, can I? And he said, it's okay, Kurt, I've always liked you, you know, Forrest helped me get into this and stuff. So, so what did I not see about Arvind? He was absorbing everything all the time. The next time we had him speak in an event like this, he would just, I have made a study of entrepreneurship as a field. He was rattling off every book that's on my, I should really get familiar with that. He had read it cover to cover. He had absorbed it. He remembered he'd seen every YouTube video, every podcast, every A16Z this, you know, he had, you know, that's jumping into and just absorbing. I can't, just as you said, whatever the landscape will be when you graduate, I can't tell you what that is, but I can tell you that learning and preparing yourself, either in the domain in AI, is the best thing that I know to help you prepare for that. And I guess I should say, implicitly here, AI expert or domain expert and entrepreneurship expert. There is a skill to this. I'm not someone who says, oh yeah, only 1 in 10 startups are successful. No, I have a 75% investment record with another of exits, and another 10 of those are still operating companies. You know, that's not 1 in 10. You know?
I feel like it all goes back to it. There are 168 hours in a week, in a way. So, I mean, the stories that you have, Kurt, and the ability for us to sit here and listen to them are phenomenal. So I just want to thank you again, and I want to do a big group picture with the Go Bears. So let's give another round of applause. Thank you all for great questions.